police officer throws ticket boy with Down syndrome without knowing who his father was. Is it possible for an act of contempt to turn into a lesson in humanity? This question echoes in the streets of Los Angeles, where the sun shines brightly, but the shadows of prejudice and injustice extend everywhere. Ethan Carter, a 10-year-old boy, lives in a world that is often not kind to him. Diagnosed with Down syndrome, he carries not only the lightness of his innocence, but also the weight of a critical gaze that follows him with every step. Despite the difficulties, his greatest dream is to be accepted and loved like any other child. He loves to draw and imagines a future where his artwork can make people smile. Before we begin, please give a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any exciting stories like this one. Comment on which city you are watching from. We want to get to know you and see how far this story will reach. Now get ready, let's begin. On the other hand, Ethan's life is marked by a hostile environment. School, which should be a place of learning and friendship, often turns into a battleground, where the laughter of his peers can quickly turn into ridicule. The neighborhood streets, filled with cars and hurried people, offer no respite of compassion. The boy feels like a stranger in his own city, always at the mercy of disdainful looks and cruel words that have no idea how painful they can be. On a day that seemed ordinary, Ethan encountered a police officer, Bradley Turner. During a routine stop, Turner, without a second thought, threw a tick at the boy, as if he were an object, not a child with feelings. This absurd and cruel action not only humiliated Ethan, but also exposed the deep ignorance and prejudice that still permeates society. The officer, with his own insecurities and frustrations, did not realize that this act was not just a contempt for a different boy, but an affront to human dignity. What Turner did not know was that Ethan's father, Jonathan Carter, is the district attorney of the city, a respected and admired man. The contrast between Ethan's life and his father's position creates a conflict that resonates on different levels. Jonathan, always concerned about his son's protection and well-being, must now face the reality that prejudice knows no bounds, not even in places where there should be safety and respect. This revelation not only triggers a personal struggle, but also a call to action, an opportunity to challenge the system and change the narrative that marginalizes people like Ethan. As the story unfolds, the emotional impact of this humiliation becomes palpable. Ethan, already so vulnerable, sees his hopes and dreams threatened by an act of contempt that should never have happened. He feels powerless and confused, struggling to understand why someone could act so cruelly. At the same time, Jonathan realizes that his fight is not just for his son, but for all children facing the same reality. A father's determination transforms into a quest for justice, not only for Ethan, but for all those who have been silenced by discrimination. The city, which once seemed indifferent, now becomes the stage for a dramatic confrontation between ignorance and justice. The challenge ahead is monumental. How to turn an act of inhumanity into an opportunity for empowerment and change. Ethan and Jonathan's journey will not only be about the fight against prejudice, but also about discovering the strength of solidarity and empathy in a world that often seems adrift. Thus, the story of a boy and his father intertwines with universal issues of acceptance, justice, and the search for a better future, where everyone can find their place, regardless of their differences. After the humiliating incident with the police officer, Ethan felt as if the world around him was becoming dark and oppressive. Despite his dreams of being an artist, the pain and shame kept him from drawing. He spent his days at home, locked in his room, surrounded by blank papers that once inspired him. The lightness of his childhood was being suffocated by a feeling of inadequacy, and he wondered if he would ever be able to free himself from that weight. Jonathan, in turn, was in a whirlwind of emotions. As a father, he had always done his best to protect Ethan, but now he found himself in a position of vulnerability. Indignation burned within him, but there was also an unrest. What could he do to ensure that his son would never face such contempt again? He felt torn between the need to act and the doubt about the effectiveness of his actions. The role he played as district attorney seemed distant from his son's reality, and the fight for justice was becoming a personal battle. At that moment, a new figure emerged in Ethan's life. Mia, a girl from his school who had also experienced the cruel gaze of society. Mia, who had a keen sensitivity and an indomitable spirit, quickly became a close friend to Ethan. She also faced prejudice for being different, but her resilience was inspiring. Together, they shared stories and supported each other, and Mia became a light in the darkness that surrounded Ethan. However, their friendship was tested when Mia began to be the target of jokes for her relationship with Ethan. Social pressure threatened to separate the two, and Ethan found himself in a dilemma. Should he give up his friendship out of fear of what others would think? Ethan's reactions were complex. He wanted to be strong, but often felt small. In a moment of vulnerability, he confided in his mother, expressing his insecurities and the desire to be accepted. She, with tears in her eyes, hugged him and encouraged him to never be ashamed of who he was. Those words echoed in his mind, but doubt remained. The idea that, to be accepted, he might have to hide or mold himself into the image others expected was a painful thought. Jonathan began to mobilize, seeking support in his community. He decided to organize a meeting at Ethan's school with the intention of educating students about inclusion and respect. However, as he prepared for the event, he faced resistance from some parents and school members who saw the situation as just a child's play. This opposition further tested his determination, and he questioned whether he could really change anything. The fight for justice was not just for Ethan, but for all those who faced the same disdain. The emotional impact of the conflict became more evident as the days passed. Ethan found himself torn between the desire to express himself artistically and the fear of being rejected. At the same time, Jonathan felt the weight of responsibility and the urge to protect his son in a system that often seemed indifferent to his needs. The interactions between father and son, filled with love, were now punctuated by moments of tension and concern. Both found themselves on a journey of self-discovery, trying to understand not only themselves, but also the world around them. Mia, noticing Ethan's struggle, decided it was time to act. She organized a small support group at school where children could gather to discuss their experiences and learn about empathy. The idea was simple, yet powerful, and Ethan found the courage to participate. Seeing other children share their own stories of pain and overcoming, he began to understand that he was not alone. Their friendship blossomed amid challenges, and even with the obstacles, the connection between them grew stronger. The town, which once seemed indifferent, began to slowly transform. Jonathan and Mia's initiative started to attract attention, and soon others joined the cause. The struggle for inclusion and acceptance was just beginning, but a father's determination and the courage of an unexpected friendship showed that change was possible, even in the darkest situations. Ethan and Jonathan's story intertwined with Mia's and other children's, and together they formed a chorus of voices calling for a fairer and more welcoming world. Ethan, even with the new friendship blossoming, faced a new challenge when a group of students began to spread malicious rumors about him and Mia. The jokes became more frequent, and the social pressure intensified, leading Ethan to feel that the light Mia brought was beginning to fade. He found himself again in a cycle of doubt and insecurity, questioning whether it was worth fighting for a friendship that seemed to be becoming a burden. The fear of losing Mia and the acceptance of others paralyzed him, and he felt increasingly isolated, even surrounded by people. Mia, on the other hand, was not willing to be defeated. With her unwavering determination, she decided to confront the aggressors. She organized a peaceful demonstration at school where students could express their support for diversity and inclusion. However, this action had unexpected consequences. Some students, instead of joining the cause, decided to retaliate, escalating the taunts and insults. This escalation of hostility hit Ethan hard, who felt guilty for putting Mia in such a vulnerable position. Their friendship, which had once been a safe harbor, was now at the mercy of a hostile environment. Jonathan, noticing the emotional impact this situation was having on his son, began to question whether he was doing the right thing. What he had envisioned as a step toward change now seemed to be putting Ethan on a more dangerous path. He found himself struggling with feelings of powerlessness, frustrated by his inability to protect his son from the cruelty that existed around him. The nights became long, and he often found himself reliving the moment when Ethan had been humiliated by the police officer, thinking about how he could have acted differently. Meanwhile, Mia, with her contagious energy, tried to motivate Ethan to join her cause, but he hesitated, battling the ghosts of rejection that haunted him. Each day, the pressure to fit in and the need to be accepted pushed him further away from his true essence. Conversations with Mia became tenser, and he realized that their friendship was being tested in ways he had never imagined. He feared that his hesitation might drive Mia away, and that thought left him even more distressed. The turning point began to form when, in an act of courage, Mia decided to expose herself to ridicule and share her own story of pain and overcoming during a school assembly. Her vulnerability touched many hearts, and she managed to mobilize a considerable group of students who supported the cause. Ethan, seeing her so fearless, felt a spark of hope ignite within him, but doubt still consumed him. He knew he needed to face his fears, but the idea of exposing himself again terrified him. In the meantime, Jonathan, noticing the positive impact Mia's courage was having on the students, doubled his efforts. He began to collaborate with Mia and other students, organizing workshops on empathy and respect. The resistance from some parents and school members was still palpable, but the energy of the youth began to create a movement that could not be ignored. Jonathan felt that, for the first time, there was a real chance for change. However, tensions escalated when a group of dissatisfied parents decided to organize a meeting to oppose the inclusion initiatives. The fear that their children would be influenced by new ideas of acceptance spread quickly, creating a climate of hostility. Jonathan found himself facing a dilemma. Should he join Mia and the students in the fight for justice, risking further division, or should he take a more cautious approach, prioritizing Ethan's safety? Emotions were running high, and Ethan, amidst all this, realized that in order to overcome his fears, he needed to find his own voice. He began to sketch new drawings, no longer just seeking acceptance, but as a way to express his experiences and emotions. He realized that art could be his refuge and his weapon. This new perspective began to give him a sense of empowerment, a spark that could guide him through times of darkness. The road ahead was filled with challenges, but the collective determination of Mia, Jonathan, and Ethan began to create waves of change. The struggle for inclusion and acceptance was far from easy, but the courage to face their own fears and the strength of unlikely friendships suggested that together they could transform not only their lives, but also the culture around them. The transformative event occurred during a school assembly, a moment that was supposed to be one of unity and reflection, but ended up becoming a battleground. Mia, determined to fight for a more inclusive environment, took the stage and shared her story of pain and overcoming. The sincerity of her words resonated in many hearts, and Ethan couldn't help but feel emotional seeing her so fearless. However, the reaction from some students was the opposite. A group, opposing her message, began to shout and hurl insults, trying to destabilize her. Ethan saw Mia's courage confronted by hostility, and it hit him deeply. It was at that moment that he felt a wave of emotions. The pain of seeing Mia exposed to ridicule made him question his own courage. He remembered the times he hesitated, the opportunities when he could have stood up alongside her, but let fear take over. Doubt consumed him, but at the same time, a spark of inspiration began to ignite within him. He realized he could no longer remain in the shadow of his friendship with Mia. He needed to find his own voice and take a stand. The reactions to Mia's speech created new circumstances. While some students rallied in support of her, others became even more hostile, forming a divided camp within the school. This left Ethan in an even greater dilemma. He knew he needed to act, but what would that mean for his friendship with Mia and for his own safety? This new scenario brought forth a new possibility, the idea that they could unite and strengthen each other in the face of adversity, but also a threat, as the resistance was intensifying. Ethan, observing Mia's strength, felt that art could be his refuge and his weapon. He began to sketch new drawings, not just as a form of expression, but as a means of protest. The images emerging from his pencil reflected his emotions, his struggles, and the hope for a more inclusive future. This new perspective not only fueled his confidence, but also served as a catalyst for change. The emotional impact of this turning point was profound. By deciding to stand alongside Mia, Ethan began to break free from the chains of fear that held him back. He found himself on a new path, where his voice could be heard and where friendship could flourish amid adversity. This decision not only transformed the dynamic between him and Mia, but also created space for other students to join the cause. The pressure to fit in that had once isolated him began to dissipate, making way for a sense of belonging among those fighting for a common goal. Jonathan, noticing the transformation in his son, felt a wave of relief and hope. He saw how Mia's courage was inspiring Ethan to embrace his true self. The father began to get more actively involved, supporting the inclusion initiative at the school and encouraging Ethan to express himself through art. Jonathan realized that the fight for acceptance was not just his son's battle, but a collective struggle that could shape the future for many others. The anticipation for the climax of the story grew. With resistance intensifying and the division in the school becoming more apparent, Ethan and Mia prepared for a final confrontation. They knew they needed to unite more than ever, using their voices and skills to challenge prejudice and hostility. What once seemed a burden was now becoming an opportunity for growth and transformation, not just for them, but for the entire school community. Thus, the turning point not only redefined the course of the story, but also shed light on the power of friendship, courage, and expression. Ethan, Mia, and Jonathan were ready to face the challenges ahead, strengthened by a new determination and the certainty that together they could create a more inclusive and welcoming world. The immediate repercussions of Mia's speech at the assembly were intense and palpable. The school, which had once seemed a safe environment, was now becoming fertile ground for division and discord. Ethan felt the change in the air, a tension hovering over the students, as if everyone was waiting for a sign to take a stand. Mia's courage had awakened something in him, but it also brought to the surface his deepest fears. He found himself in conflict, a mix of excitement and apprehension, as he walked through the halls, where whispers and suspicious glances were becoming more frequent. The students supporting Mia began to gather in a network of solidarity. They organized meetings after school, discussing ways to promote inclusion and create a more welcoming environment. Ethan found himself drawn to this new dynamic, but he also felt the weight of the resistance that was emerging. The hostile groups were not content to simply shout insults. They began to organize, creating an atmosphere of fear that threatened to suffocate the small flame of hope that had sprouted among Mia's supporters. The first major challenge arose when one of the leaders of the opposing group, a student known for his aggressive behavior, decided to confront Mia and her allies directly. During recess, he approached with a group of followers, provoking and trying to intimidate those who were advocating for inclusion. Ethan, now part of this movement, realized he needed to act, but doubt consumed him once again. Should he stand up and defend Mia, or retreat and protect himself? As the pressure mounted, he began to question what it really meant to be a friend. He remembered the times he had been a silent bystander, and that memory troubled him. Introspection took over his afternoons as he sketched new drawings that not only captured his internal struggle, but also Mia's strength and determination. Art became his escape, a way to process his emotions and reflect on what was at stake. At the same time, Jonathan, Ethan's father, was becoming an increasing source of support. He encouraged his son to use his voice, not just at home, but also at school. Jonathan began attending parent meetings, where he spoke about the importance of inclusion and respect. This new stance from Jonathan brought a renewed sense of hope to Ethan, who realized he was not alone in this fight. The connection between father and son grew stronger, and Ethan began to understand that his courage could impact the lives of many, just like Mia's. However, the resistance intensified. The opposing group began to take more hostile actions, spreading rumors and trying to undermine the confidence of Mia's supporters. Ethan felt the pressure increase, and the idea of speaking out openly became increasingly daunting. Nevertheless, the strength he saw in Mia, her determination to face adversity, fueled his own desire to fight. He decided he could no longer be a bystander. It was time to act. In this context of rising tension, Ethan and Mia began to plan an art presentation that would highlight stories of inclusion and diversity. They wanted to show that the school could be a place of welcome, where everyone felt safe and respected. This initiative not only united the supporters, but also sparked the interest of students who were on the fence, hesitating between taking a stand or remaining silent. The development of this presentation became a catalyst for change. Ethan, finally feeling part of something larger, began to open up more about his emotions and concerns. He became an active voice in the meetings, expressing his ideas and listening to the experiences of others. This interaction made him realize that the fight for inclusion was not just about him and Mia, but a collective journey that could impact the lives of many. Meanwhile, the school was preparing for the impending confrontation. Tensions were high, and the division was becoming more evident. Ethan knew the coming weeks would be crucial. The art presentation could be a turning point, but also a battleground. He felt torn between anxiety and hope, but one thing was certain. He was determined to stand alongside Mia, challenging not only the opponents, but also the fears that had kept him trapped for so long. The path to the climax was forming, and he was ready to take the next step. Ethan began to realize that the courage that had awakened inside him was not just a reaction to Mia's speech, but a force that was manifesting in his everyday life. He felt more confident interacting with his peers, and for the first time saw himself as an agent of change. The art meetings, initially a space of insecurity, became fertile ground for expressing his ideas and feelings. Through his drawings, he began to tell stories that challenged prejudices and promoted inclusion, using his creativity to address issues that had previously paralyzed him. The lessons he learned from adversity began to materialize in concrete actions. Ethan had not only become an advocate for inclusion, but also a mentor to other students who hesitated to speak up. He started listening to others' stories, recognizing their struggles, and joining forces to create a sense of community. This not only helped him connect with his peers, but also solidified his own identity as someone who cared and was willing to fight for what was right. The changes in his demeanor were evident. The shyness that once dominated his interactions began to dissipate, giving way to a more assertive attitude. He became a bridge between groups that had once seemed so distant. When the opposing group tried to intimidate Mia, Ethan did not hesitate. He stood up, his voice firm, defending not only his friend, but all those who felt threatened by hostility. This decision was not just an act of courage, but a reflection of his growth. He realized that every small action could have significant repercussions, and that change began with him. The friendship between Ethan and Mia flourished in this environment of struggle and solidarity. They became more than just allies. They were partners in the quest for a more inclusive school environment. The conversations they had about art and social justice became profound, and Ethan learned to value Mia's perspective, which brought a unique and powerful vision. Through her, he began to understand the importance of listening to and learning from the experiences of others, especially those that were different from his own. As the date of the presentation approached, the tension at school increased. The opposing groups were determined to silence the voices calling for change, but instead of discouraging him, this only strengthened Ethan's resolve. He knew that the presentation would not just be an art showcase, but a pivotal moment that could change the school's narrative. The atmosphere of anticipation and nervousness was palpable, but he felt prepared, not just as an artist, but as an advocate for inclusion. The lessons Ethan had learned had become part of his essence. He no longer viewed the struggle for inclusion as a burdensome task, but as an opportunity for growth and learning. He was willing to face the challenges that arose, knowing that each obstacle was a chance to become stronger and more resilient. His worldview was expanding, and the idea that change was possible began to take root in his heart. On the day of the presentation, Ethan felt nervous, but also filled with hope. He knew he was about to take an important step, not just for himself, but for everyone who wanted a more inclusive environment. The room was filled with students, teachers, and parents who had gathered to witness what they hoped would be a transformative moment. He looked at Mia, who was by his side, and felt a wave of connection and purpose. Together, they were ready to challenge the status quo, and regardless of what happened next, Ethan knew he had found his voice. The journey of overcoming and growth was just beginning, and he was more than willing to continue. The presentation began, and the tension in the room was palpable. Ethan looked at the crowd of curious and hostile faces, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The project that he and Mia had worked on for weeks was not just an art display. It was a manifesto for inclusion and respect for differences. He knew that by putting himself out there, he was putting himself at risk, but the courage he had cultivated would not allow him to back down. When it was his turn to speak, Ethan took a deep breath and addressed the audience. His voice, initially hesitant, soon gained strength as he shared the essence of his work. He spoke about the power of empathy, about listening to the voices that were often silenced, and about the importance of creating a space where everyone felt welcome. He saw Mia by his side, her encouraging smile giving him the confidence he needed. But soon, the atmosphere changed. From the back of the room, a group of students, the same ones who had bullied Mia, began to boo. The sound of laughter and jeers echoed, trying to undermine the message of inclusion that Ethan was trying to convey. His heart raced, and a knot in his stomach threatened to paralyze him. He was facing his greatest challenge, not only the hostility of his peers, but the internal struggle against the fear of being rejected and ridiculed. But in that moment, Ethan remembered the lessons he had learned. He was not alone. He had Mia and the other students who also longed for change. He took a deep breath and decided that he would not let fear take over. "This is not just an art project," he said, his voice stronger now. "It is a call to action. We need to come together and fight against prejudice and exclusion. We all have a story, and each of those stories is valuable." He looked directly at the students who were making noise, challenging them to listen, to open up to the possibility of change. The room fell silent, and the atmosphere of tension transformed into anticipation. Ethan continued, now with renewed passion. He spoke about the experiences of his peers, about the struggles each faced, and the importance of embracing diversity. He not only exposed himself, but also the prejudices that permeated the school, recognizing that change began with the willingness to listen and learn. What had once seemed like a solemn speech was now transforming into an emotional appeal, and the impact of his words began to resonate in the room. However, the hostile group was not willing to back down. One of the students stood up and shouted, "Do you think you can change anything? This is just a waste of time." The challenge was clear, and the tension increased. Now, Ethan found himself faced with a critical choice. Back down and allow the voices of negativity to prevail, or confront the challenge head-on, knowing that his message was stronger than any mockery. He decided not only to respond, but to turn the anger into a moment of learning. "I'm not here to change your mind, but to invite you to join us. What we are doing here is not about one group against another. It is about all of us together. If you feel threatened, maybe it is time to ask why. Let's talk, work together, and understand what separates us." The silence that followed was deafening. He had planted a seed of reflection, and the room seemed to be in a moment of clarity. The emotional impact of the climax was evident. Students who had laughed before now looked at each other, questioning their own attitudes. Even some of those who had previously opposed Ethan began to feel touched by the sincerity of his words. And, by his side, Mia was radiant. She knew that Ethan's courage had not only transformed him, but had also encouraged others to join the fight for inclusion. The presentation did not end with an immediate resolution, but the transformation that occurred in the room was undeniable. Ethan had faced his greatest challenge, and instead of being defeated, he had inspired a dialogue. He had broken down significant social barriers, and the fight for inclusion at the school felt closer than ever. Ethan's journey didn't end there. In fact, it had only just begun, but he already felt that his voice had the power to provoke real change. And that realization, in itself, was a monumental victory. After the presentation, the room still buzzed with the energy of the moment. Ethan felt a mix of relief and euphoria as he realized that despite the initial resistance, his words had managed to penetrate the barriers of prejudice. He looked around and saw faces that had previously shown hostility now in contemplation. The group that had shouted fell silent, some students with expressions of reflection, while others seemed to be discussing among themselves, perhaps reconsidering their attitudes. In the days that followed, Ethan began to notice the subtle yet significant changes that were occurring around him. He received supportive messages from classmates who had remained silent until then, and some of those who had been hostile began to approach him, seeking to better understand what he and Mia were trying to convey. The atmosphere at school began to change. Conversations about inclusion and respect for differences began to arise in the hallways, and Ethan and Mia's project became a symbol of hope for many. Reflecting on his journey, Ethan realized how fear had dominated his life for so long. He had always worried about others' opinions, but now, by exposing himself so vulnerably, he had found not only courage, but also a purpose. He understood that true power did not lie in changing everyone's opinions, but in creating a safe space for conversations to happen. The feeling of accomplishment that accompanied him was palpable. He had been able to inspire others to join him in the fight against exclusion. Mia, by his side, was also experiencing a transformation. She felt more confident and empowered after the presentation. The experiences shared by Ethan had deeply touched her, and she knew that together they could make a difference. The friendship between the two grew stronger each day, and the connection they had became a source of strength for both. What had once been a common project was now becoming a joint mission, a commitment to promote inclusion and celebrate differences. The events of that presentation not only impacted Ethan and Mia, but also reverberated in the relationships of other students. Someone who had previously always stayed on the sidelines, Alice, a shy student struggling with anxiety, found herself inspired to join the support group that was forming at school. She not only began to actively participate in discussions, but also brought her own experiences, becoming a powerful voice in the fight for inclusion. What had once been segregated groups were now beginning to unite around a common goal. Meanwhile, the group that had been hostile toward Ethan began to undergo a slow but visible transformation. One of the students, Lucas, who had been the most vocal against the presentation, had a deep conversation with a classmate who challenged him to rethink his actions. Lucas began to question what had led him to act that way and gradually became part of the dialogue, willing to learn and change. Ethan realized that the journey was just beginning. The impact of his presentation would not be instantaneous, but the seeds of change were being planted. He decided that instead of resting on the laurels of his achievement, he should continue to promote inclusion both inside and outside the school. The desire to create an environment where everyone felt safe and respected became the driving force of his life. As he walked through the school hallways, Ethan felt a new energy around him. Students were now talking about their stories, sharing experiences, and challenging prejudices. He knew that there was still much work ahead, but the feeling that change was possible motivated him. He had found his voice, and, with it, the ability to influence not only his life, but the lives of everyone around him. The future looked promising, and as Ethan and Mia continued to work together, the school began to transform into a more welcoming place. With each step they took, they not only broke down barriers, but also built bridges of understanding and respect. The journey for inclusion and diversity was far from over. But now Ethan knew he was not alone, and that together they could achieve great changes. In the following months, Ethan and Mia worked tirelessly to expand the inclusion project at school. They organized events, debates, and workshops that attracted more and more students, and the message of respect and empathy began to resonate in every corner. The support group, which had once been small, blossomed into a network of solidarity, connecting students from different backgrounds and stories. However, even though there was a palpable change in the atmosphere of the school, Ethan's journey was far from perfect. Resistance still existed, and while many joined the cause, others felt threatened by the new dynamic. Lucas, who had become an advocate for inclusion, faced backlash from some of his old friends who did not understand his change in stance. Ethan, seeing Lucas under pressure, felt a weight in his heart. He had inspired change, but at an emotional cost to those who were willing to join the fight. On a rainy afternoon, while organizing an event to celebrate diversity, Ethan received a message from Lucas. The tone of the message was heavy. Lucas was feeling isolated and distressed. He wrote that he just wanted to help, but now felt so alone. The feeling of guilt began to invade Ethan. He had wished for change, but never imagined it would bring so much pain to his friends. The culmination of this conflict arose during the final presentation of the project. Ethan and Mia were nervous but optimistic. They wanted to show the world how far they had come. However, as they stepped onto the stage, Ethan noticed Lucas in the audience, looking sad and lost. He felt a part of his courage slipping away. After the presentation, instead of celebrating, Ethan met with Lucas. In a heartfelt conversation, they discussed the ups and downs of the journey and how inclusion was not just about accepting others, but also about dealing with the consequences of their actions. Ethan realized that although they had reached many, there was a price to be paid for change. He saw the pain in Lucas's eyes and the loneliness of some who still felt excluded, even amid a growing movement. What should have been a victory was turning into a bittersweet win. The success of the project did not erase the wounds that had been opened along the way. The transformations he so desired also revealed divisions that existed, and acknowledging this weighed heavy on his heart. Ethan learned that the struggle for inclusion was not just about claiming space, but also about understanding and embracing those who did not feel ready for change. The journey transformed him, but also taught him about the complexity of human relationships. He could not save everyone, but he could continue to be a voice for those who were still afraid to express themselves. As he left the school that afternoon, Ethan reflected on everything he had experienced. He knew that change was a process, and that victories often came with sacrifices. He felt empowered, but also more aware of the challenges still ahead. His mission was far from over, and he was ready to face them, not alone, but alongside those who still believed that a more inclusive future was possible. The message he wanted to leave for everyone was clear. True victory is not just about gaining acceptance, but also being willing to listen, support, and understand. The path may be long and difficult, but every step taken toward inclusion was worth it. And so, with a heavy but hopeful heart, Ethan moved forward, ready to continue the fight, aware that the journey for true change is filled with ups and downs, but always worth it.